Before dying, the man approached the car window and deliberately tapped the glass a few times. Thinking it was safe outside, he rolled up his sleeves and prepared to reach out to measure the thickness of the mudslide. However, just as he was about to do so, a massive amount of mud surged into the car. Terrified, he quickly shut the window, narrowly avoiding being buried alive. Unwilling to give up, he shook off the mud clinging to his hand. As he pondered his next move, the glass on the car's roof suddenly began to crack. In a panic, he grabbed a roll of tape and hastily applied it all over the cracks, but how could thin tape possibly withstand the weight of tons of mud? At a loss, he accidentally noticed a steering wheel lock. He had no idea if it would be useful, but given the dire situation, he didn't have time to think. He quickly unlocked it with the key and wedged it against the glass. Fortunately, its length was just right to brace against both sides of the car. He observed for a while, ensuring that the mud was no longer seeping in before finally breathing a sigh of relief. He then grabbed a bottle of water and drank deeply. Still shaken from the terrifying experience, he absent-mindedly drank most of the water before realizing it was almost gone. By the time he noticed, it was too late, so he decided to finish it all in one go, leaving himself no backup. After finishing the water, his tense nerves gradually relaxed. He then recalled that the accident had occurred in a desolate mountain region, a place rarely traveled by vehicles. If not for meeting a client, he would never have come to such a godforsaken place. Now, waiting for someone to discover him could take an eternity, so he had no choice but to rely on himself. Unfortunately, his phone had no signal, and even the radio couldn't pick up any stations. Calling for rescue was impossible in this situation. Frustrated, he started the engine, hoping to power through the mud. Instead, his actions triggered a secondary landslide. Fortunately, he was unharmed, but the scare taught him not to act recklessly again. Coming down, he began thinking about how to escape. He searched through all the tools in the car, hoping to find something useful. However, despite looking for a long time, he couldn't find anything to break through the thick mud above him. Just then, he noticed water beginning to seep through the cracks in the glass. Seeing this, he hurriedly put his mouth to the glass, ignoring whether the water was clean. But drinking in such tiny drips was far from satisfying. He then tried using his finger to pry open the crack, hoping for a bigger flow of water. Instead, he ended up cutting his finger deeply. Left with no choice, he took a bank card, folded it into a funnel shape, and placed it over the bottle's opening before wedging the bottle into the water source. With this simple water collection device, he even prepared to save his urine as a backup. The water issue was solved, but in such an enclosed space, oxygen would soon run out. Thinking quickly, he came up with a plan. He removed the steel tubes from a folding chair and pushed them through the glass cracks into the mud. However, this caused muddy water to flow in through the tubes. Spotting a bottle cap nearby, he had a clever idea. He used a nail clipper to poke a hole in the cap, threaded a string through it, and then stuffed it into the steel pipe, sealing the opening. This helped prevent water from seeping in. However, the thickness of the mud exceeded his expectations. His 1-meter-long steel pipe hadn't even reached the surface. He had no choice but to get another pipe. Using the same method, he connected the two pipes and sealed the joint with tape. Then he pushed the pipe upward again, but it was still not long enough. So, he fetched a third pipe. As he kept pushing, the pressure increased, making it harder to insert the pipe. Eventually, no matter how much force he used, the pipe wouldn't move any further. Luckily, the car had a jack. With the help of this tool, the pipe extended further. But soon, even the jack reached its limit, and he still had a long way to go. The rest would have to be done manually. He wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Then he braced the pipe with all his might. This position allowed him to use every muscle in his body. Finally, amid agonizing shouts, he successfully inserted the pipe all the way through, though he was utterly exhausted. Afterward, he replenished his energy with the last of his food. Once he had eaten and drunk enough, he took a piece of wire and slowly fed it into the steel pipe. After several minutes, he felt resistance. With one final strong push, the bottle cap at the top of the pipe was dislodged. Before pulling out the iron wire, the man first prayed in place because he wasn't sure if the steel pipe had reached above the ground. With anticipation, he looked toward the pipe opening, and when he saw the bright white hole above, he couldn't help but shout with joy. Now, he could not only breathe the fresh air from outside but might also have a chance to call for rescue. However, he knew that such a small pipe wouldn't carry his voice far. Soon, he came up with an idea. If they couldn't hear him, then he would make sure they could see him. So, the man grabbed a piece of discarded newspaper, lit it on fire, and placed it at the pipe opening, letting the rising smoke escape through the steel pipe. If someone passed by outside, they might notice the smoke. But as he focused on shouting for help, he failed to realize that the fire was about to burn his fingers. Although he managed to avoid a major disaster, he nearly choked himself unconscious. His hope of escaping was once again shattered, and he had to think of a new plan. Just then, the steel pipe, unable to withstand the immense pressure of the mud, began to slide downward, blocking the opening. He tried to play it with the iron wire, but he didn't notice the descending pipe. When he turned his head, he was caught on the forehead by the sharp edge, and blood immediately flowed down from his head. He soon lost consciousness. When he woke up again, the car was already filled with mud, and blood continued to flow from his head, mixing with the dirt and causing an unbearable itch. He couldn't understand why he had to be so unlucky. Not only was he trapped alone in a mudslide, but fate seemed determined to punish him further. With no other choice, he used his clothes to bandage the wound and then secured it with his belt. He managed to temporarily stop the bleeding, but the pipe opening above remained blocked. Before long, the oxygen in the car would be completely depleted. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, he sat there, crying uncontrollably. After some time, he forced himself to stay calm and recorded his final words for his wife and unborn child. Not long after, the car, unable to withstand the pressure of the mud, started collapsing. Fortunately, the man reacted quickly and moved to the back seat in time. But soon, the same problem occurred there. He hurriedly propped up the roof with a steel pipe. Although it temporarily held off the pressure, he knew it wouldn't last long. Eventually, the entire car would be crushed by the mud. After much thought, he decided to take a gamble and escape through the mudslide. After eating the last bit of his remaining food, he grabbed a spare air pump from the trunk and connected it to a small tank. With that, he had created a simple oxygen tank. Next, he stripped off all his clothes and covered his entire body with lubricant, hoping to make himself as slippery as possible. Just then, another collapse occurred above. The man knew he couldn't delay any longer. He played a song to calm himself. Then, he broke the glass above him, allowing the mud to pour inside. His goal was to create enough space for him to crawl out. After clearing the broken glass, he placed car seat cushions along the walls of the mud chamber to prevent further collapses, allowing himself a straight path to dig out. Once everything was ready, the man strapped on his makeshift oxygen tank and began his escape. He used a steel pipe to dig through the mud. Whenever he felt short of breath, he would take a few breaths from the air pump. Luckily, the past few days had been sunny, and under the scorching sun, the mud had softened, making it easier to dig through. After every bit of progress, he used a steel pipe to secure the car cushions in place, preventing the mud walls from caving in. He recorded a final video on his phone to encourage himself. But just as he was about to stop for a sip of water, the mountainside suddenly collapsed. In an instant, he was buried once again. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously injured. Before long, he managed to dig himself out of the mud. Ironically, the collapse had cleared most of the dirt above him, saving him from digging a long tunnel. Still, the situation remained dire. If he couldn't escape in time, he would eventually suffocate to death. Wiping the dirt from his face, he desperately cried for help. Suddenly, he noticed a faint white light ahead. He quickly dug away the remaining mud. And then, in the next second, a bright light shone on his face. The man smiled with joy. Soon, a hand reached out from the dirt. He greedily inhaled the fresh air and bathed in the warmth of the sun. At that moment, he truly understood how precious life was. No matter what difficulties we face, we must strive to survive. As long as we are alive, there is always hope. Life belongs to us alone, no one else can control it.